Welcome everyone. Just have a quick announcement before we get started. So there are no planned fire drills. So if you hear the alarm, the closest exit is through the main doors behind me, with the fire assembly point at the end of the footpath. This event is being live streamed and recorded. So now I can hand it over to Alex, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Emily. Hello, everyone. And I'm really impressed that you've made it through the weather, because I walked over here and just thought I wouldn't blame anyone if they didn't come today. But so thank you for braving the wind and the rain. So welcome to everyone who is here with us and everyone joining online. I'm Alex Taylor. I'm a reader in design informatics based here at the University of Edinburgh. I've been developing sociologically informed critical perspectives of AI for over 15 years, and I'm currently a BRAID research fellow studying the human labor that the proliferation of AI depends on. I'd like to welcome you all to our Technomoral Conversation, What's the Story with AI, AI Narratives and Counter-Narratives. This event is a collaboration between the Edinburgh Futures Institute, the Bridging Responsible AI Divides Programme, or BRAID, and the Centre for Technomoral Futures. The Futures Institute addresses global challenges and opportunities through interdisciplinary collaboration, research, and education. It brings together experts from various fields, including the arts, science, and technology, to explore and develop innovative solutions for the future. As part of the Edinburgh Futures Institute, the Centre for Technomoral Futures works to unify technical and moral knowledge in new models of research, education, design, and engagement that directly serve the goals of sustainable, just, and ethical innovation. Funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, the Bridging Responsible AI program, BRAID, works to bridge the divides between academic, industry, policy, and regulatory work on responsible AI. Working in partnership with the Ada Lovelace Institute and the BBC, the BRAID team brings together expertise in human-computer interaction, moral philosophy, arts, design, law, the social sciences, journalism, and AI. And so just a bit about today's event. Today, we're excited to hear from our conversationalists about the narratives that prevail in their sectors and their areas of expertise. We're also keen to explore what narratives do for both the AI tech sector and for those reporting on and critically engaging with it. Finally, we want to discuss counter-narratives, or even hopeful narratives, that our conversational members might have considered or be thinking about in response to today's conversation. There's lots to cover here, but we'll do our best to cover it. Following the Technomoral Conversation, there'll be time for questions. There'll be roving mics for those of you in the room, and for those online, you can submit questions using Slido. So it just leaves me to introduce our speakers for tonight. Let me first introduce Dr. Abeba Birhane, who's founded and leads the Trinity College Dublin AI Accountability Lab, AIAL. She is an assistant professor of AI at the School of Computer Science and Statistics at Trinity College Dublin. Dr. Birhane researches AI accountability with a particular focus on audits of AI models and training data sets, work for which she was featured in Wired UK and in Time on their Time 100 Most Influential People in AI in 2023. Dr. Birhane also served as the United Nations Secretary General's AI Advisory Body and currently serves as the on the AI Advisory Council in Ireland. Next, I want to introduce John Thornhill. He is an innovation editor and tech columnist at the Financial Times, where he writes a weekly award-winning column on the impact of technology with a particular focus on AI. He's also the founder and editorial director of Sifted, the FT-backed site for European startups, and a host of Tectonic, the FT's technology podcast. John was previously deputy editor and news editor on the FT in London. He's also been Europe editor, Paris bureau chief, Asia editor, Moscow correspondent, and Lex columnist. He is on the board of the Ada Lovelace Institute. Just to introduce Steph Wright, she has a diverse background ranging from astrophysics to genomics, in academia and film and TV, to dance, in the arts and the third sector. A project and program management professional, she loves to develop and build collaborations across organizations to help people with their data AI journey. She is co-founder and managing director of Our AI Collective, CIC, which works to empower communities to shape AI future and strengthen civic power in the age of AI. Steph has been recognized as one of the 100 brilliant women in AI ethics in 2023, one of the top 10 women in tech in Scotland in 2023, and recently named in 2025 Digital Leaders AI 100 UK list. She was awarded the 2024 Digital IQ Award for Data and AI for Good Champion. Please join me in welcoming our speakers. Thank you. So I wanted to start with a general question about the prevailing narratives within the sectors or areas of expertise of our conversationalists. So I'm going to start with John. Could you speak briefly about one of the prevailing narratives in your sector?
Sure. Well, good evening, everyone, and it's great to be part of this conversation. So I'm a journalist, a financial journalist, and I'm therefore in the story business. And I first became interested in AI in about 2015 when I heard what I thought was an extraordinarily interesting story. It was when I was deputy editor at the FT, and Google paid $650 million for a company called DeepMind in London, which I had never heard of. So I was rather intrigued by what they did. So I went along to see them and met Demis Hassabis and Mustafa Suleyman, who were two of the three founders of DeepMind. And then I could kind of understand why Google had paid so much money, because the story they told was absolutely fascinating about how they could use AI to address so many problems. And they had a slide which included in their pitch book, which was where they raised their initial money from. And it said DeepMind's mission was 1, to solve intelligence, and 2, to use intelligence to solve everything else. And that's obviously either insanely ambitious or wildly delusional. But I thought it was a very interesting story and to see how that played out. And it clearly had persuaded Google to pay money to buy them. But I think that basic narrative is also fueling this extraordinary investment that we're seeing in AI today. I obviously look at the kind of financial markets and how companies are investing in AI. And that is basically the narrative. They believe that this is a phenomenal technology that will be able to solve everything. The trouble with writing about this area, which I find extraordinarily difficult and challenging, is because of the difficulty in defining what a lot of these terms mean, starting with artificial intelligence itself. I mean, it was developed, first used in 1955 by a Stanford professor, John McCarthy, at a workshop in Dartmouth to come up with this idea of a kind of thinking machine. But it is, in fact, a terrible term. And I was at an event the other day where someone put it quite well. They said it was an aspiration rather than a reality. In what other field do we write or think about the aspiration rather than the reality of what we're talking about? It's almost as if we renamed the field of economics universal prosperity, something that we aspire to, something rather than something exists. And it actually gets worse than that, because there are a lot of other terms that are now laden on top of AI, most notably artificial general intelligence, which is the kind of ultimate goal of AI, or the kind of holy grail of the industry. That's the term was really coined, I think, by Shane Legg, who is the third co-founder of DeepMind. And it's the idea that we will be able to develop AI that has capabilities, can match human ability and cognitive tasks across all range of functions. And that will lead to a kind of step change of progress. Well, as I'm sure we're going to hear, that kind of definition itself, what does it actually mean? How do we know if we've reached it? And I think there's a lot of problems with that definition. But as I say, it is really what is driving the $660 billion that the big four tech companies in America are investing in this year. A lot of people will rubbish the whole idea of AGI altogether. But I think it's still really what is motivating a lot of the investment that is going in. And in particular, there's the concept of, even beyond AGI, the whole concept of superintelligence, which I think it was an idea of a kind of technological singularity that the mathematician I.J. Good came out with in 1965, where he was talking about the development of an ultra-intelligent machine. And it would be, in his phrase, humanity's last invention, because if we actually reach this point, we would then have an intelligence explosion, and then we would have an intelligent machine that would be able to invent everything else. And this would lead to a world of kind of fully automated luxury communism, a world of radical abundance in which all of our wants were satisfied, this kind of utopian world. That's obviously, there was quite a lot to kind of science fiction, but these are definitely the narratives that are, I think, central to what we are seeing in the development of AI at the moment, and the narratives that are being told in order to justify this vast investment that is going into AI.
Thank you, John. So John, you really nicely connected sort of AGI that we are so sort of aware of in our discourses around AI and connected it to superintelligence. Abeba, did you wanted to follow up on that?
Yeah. So I am an academic, and thank you for the introduction. And I have been working in the AI space for, I have been auditing AI systems for the last 6, 7, maybe 8 years now. I won't go as far back as 1950s or the 2015 when DeepMind was acquired by Google. But if you look at even this short time span, the past 6, 7 years, as an academic auditor, when you go into an AI system and examine it, you always find issues, whether it might be discriminatory performance, whether it might be kind of encoding and perpetuating some kind of harm, or negative stereotypes, societal norms, and so on. And a few years back, this kind of argument, or this side of the debate would have received just as much attention as AI enthusiasm. Now, if you rewind, or a few years back, over the past couple of years, you feel like the AI systems haven't improved. They still, perpetuate societal norms and stereotypes and misogyny and racism and harms. But because the AI as innovation, or AI as societal advancement narrative has taken over, the other side of the debate, or the other side of the argument, rarely gets any attention. In fact, you risk being labeled as a Luddite, or anti-tech, and so on. And I just want to pull out some figures here. Because I think the AI industry has been very strategic in spending so much money and resources in portraying AI to the media, to the public in a certain way that really pushes AI as just as positive, as innovative, as really essential, as something, if you are not on the AI bandwagon, you will be left out. And some examples are, for example, last year, over 100 CEOs, including Mark Zuckerberg and Jan LeCun, he was the chief AI scientist for Meta for several years. He's left Meta last year. They got together and wrote an open letter that specifically says, EU risks missing out on the AI era if they are not, developing regulations that are pro-AI. And recently, you have companies like Meta, Google, OpenAI, Microsoft coming together, creating what they call pro-AI super PACs. For example, for this AI super PAC, they have put together 200 million specifically for the purpose of, portraying AI in a positive light and portraying regulation as something that's undesirable, something that stifles innovation. Sometimes they even go so far as, putting campaign ads. For example, Meta has spent 6.5 million where they have advertised, where they have tried to portray data centers as something that are really important for the vital lifelines of small towns that provide necessary jobs, that prevent from locals leaving their regions and so on. And these ads have been disseminated on local TVs and so on. In Ireland, where I live and do my research, in most popular newsletters such as the Irish Times, every now and again you see companies like Google will take an entire section or an entire magazine as part of that newspaper, where they would write explainer of what generative AI is. That's portrayed as AI communication or AI education, but it's mostly just corporate PR that really advertises their products and that puts their company as something that has invested interest in public good. So you see these very clear examples and indications where this type of narratives has played in the public, in the public perception, in public understandings of AI, where now the kind of work we do tends to be labeled as adversary or anti-innovation, and it becomes really difficult to kind of compete with that narrative. And I'll stop my rant there.
Thank you, Abeba. Yeah, I think the sector is really putting forward these terms like growth and the sense of a race that we need to win. And obviously they set up our adversaries like China, et cetera. And so this compulsion, if you like, that we must be sort of ahead of the game. And this sort of idea, many may have encountered this, that the government has put forward around AI growth zones. Why are we calling them growth zones? Growth for whose purpose, et cetera, I think is an interesting thing to start to grapple with. Steph, do you want to follow up?
I'm happy to continue with Abeba's rant, to be honest. She's touched on so many of the problematic narratives around AI at the moment. A key one for me that I speak a lot on is this narrative of inevitability, that it's going to happen. That's the basic assumption, and then everything builds on top of that. And I always like to counter that, because it is not inevitable, because ultimately everything about AI, everything about technology are the result of human choices. And because they are the result of choices, they can be changed. But that narrative of inevitability feeds into the FOMO, the fear of missing out, right? The you'll be left behind, all these narratives of fear. You'll be left behind, or China will win the AI race. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? Kind of thing. And it all fuels this fear, that, and it feeds into the wider narratives that digital is always better, innovation is always progress. But we just know that's just not true. But that's what's being fed on you. And like I said, you can't speak out against it without being, accused of being a party pooper. Why are you talking about the doom and gloom? Let's talk about the opportunities, the joy, or the accusation of being a Luddite. But, as I've learned in the last year, actually, that's not actually the flex they think it is. Actually being a Luddite is actually quite an empowering thing, because that is a perfect example of manipulating narratives. The Luddites weren't, knuckle dragging, didn't understand technology, and therefore they were against it. They were pro-human. They were anti-collection of wealth, because essentially the people they were rising up against were the very first tech titans, and this is a great, revelatory thing for me last year when I read Blood in the Machine, because, the history has been rewritten, so that Luddite is seen as a insult, but it isn't. It's about being pro-human, and it's not about being a human exceptionalist, but it's about, challenging these narratives. The whole regulation is a myth. Just think about who is behind the narratives and what it serves. And I know we're going to touch on this later. But who are the people that push that narrative? Regulation is a barrier to innovation. Who is pushing if you don't get with the program, you'll be left behind, because they have a product to sell you. So, and if you don't use it, they don't make any money, kind of thing. And that fear of missing out, Rachel Caldicott has this wonderful slide. FOMO is not a strategy. and I always think it's not a strategy in business, it's not a strategy in life. You shouldn't be, be motivated in business sense or in a personal sense because you might be missing out on something. I know it's a natural human instinct, so, we all feel it. But that seems to be the kind of crux of the narrative at the moment. And I always like to push for what about those people that don't have a choice? They are already left behind. Yeah. They are already missing out, and not by choice. And so, I'll stop my rant there. But yeah.
I just want to quickly follow up. I think we're at an inflection point where FOMO as a strategy might be paying for big companies because they have put in so much investment, so much resources into capturing public narratives, even the capturing the imaginations of researchers that are supposed to think critically instead of just adopting whatever narrative. I think we are at a point where FOMO might be working out, because you have privileged institutions like Oxford signing contracts with OpenAI to use generative AI for education in their research pipeline. And you have people really kind of buying into the narrative that generative AI enhances your work, it boosts productivity. So yeah, my worry is that if we don't really push back against this narrative, people might be just jumping on those without critically thinking. I mean, in my area, now most researchers use large language models in their research pipeline. For me, that just, that goes against every scientific principle. You can't guarantee reproducibility. You don't know, it's a black box system. You don't know what the system is producing. You don't know how it actually relates to the phenomena that you are actually trying to study. So it just introduces so many problems, so many confounding factors. Yet most researchers are happy to jump in and use large language models, whether it's for text classification or for generating prompts and so on. So yeah, my worry is that if we don't push back, that FOMO might be working for them.
And then it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle, right? The FOMO has led to operational investment decisions that has onboarded these technologies. And to justify that decision, they're going to have to continue that narrative that is not necessarily true, because otherwise it's like, oh, then it's admitting they've wasted their investment, isn't it? That they've, yeah, so it becomes this kind of...
Exactly. I mean, there is a massive gap between the claims that are the basis that these companies and vendors sell these systems and how these systems actually perform. As I said at the beginning, in my lab, most of what we do is evaluate, the performance accuracy or, potential harms of these systems. And for any given generative AI or even AI systems in general, when you compare the claims that are made in the marketing material versus how these systems perform, there is a massive discrepancy.
Yeah. So I think that nicely kind of brings us back to sort of the presentation of AI as this artificial general intelligence that might be on equal power to human intelligence or even beyond it. But actually what in practice we see when we trial these things in the world is that they very rarely compete beyond 1 or 2 prompts, for example. And so, I really like this sort of conversation around missing out as a sort of a trope that is returned to. I mean, I think the other thing that we see as a kind of device is I've made a note of this. The adversary that's set up for us. So sometimes it's a xenophobic kind of language of China, for example. And it's not to say China's doing a great job with AI either, but why are we sort of characterizing it as a particular country? I think sometimes it's the Luddite, sometimes it's regulation, but this sort of, as well as this fear of missing out, it's sort of how do we set up an adversary to sort of strengthen our claims around the project we've set for ourselves. I guess that takes us to the second question I had for you, and Abeba, this is going to start with you, which is sort of what does the use of the narrative enable for both the tech sector, but also for us as critical scholars or practitioners across AI?
Yeah, I feel over the past year and a half, this narrative, the consequence of this widely disseminated narrative is that, instead of deliberating the merits or utility or usefulness of these systems, now the conversation has moved to, oh, we're gonna adopt them anyway. Come and help us do it in an ethical way, whatever that means, or come and help us in a responsible way. So I think this narrative has kind of solidified or is starting to solidify the idea that these things are here to stay and they are inevitable. So now we are working from the agenda or from the assumption that we are going to find a way to make them trustworthy or ethical or whatever. And I would love us to bring the narrative back to the deliberation of, what is the utility? What are we actually missing out? Where is this race heading? Where is the end point?
Yeah, I'm curious, and maybe we can follow on with Steph and John, that if we ask ourselves what purpose these narratives are seeking to serve, is it purely the building of these systems, or do we stand back and think about wider political and economic conditions that are trying to be developed and pursued under the shield, if you like, of AI? I don't know, Steph, if you want to.
Well, I think these narratives preserve the existing power structures, because if everyone feels that it's hopeless, that they don't have a voice, they have no choice, it's happening, then no one will question, what the current structures are, and the amount of times I talk to people is like, I feel like I don't have a choice, and you're like, but you do, you really do, and you can choose not to use Copilot, you can choose not to use ChatGPT. These are active choices you can make. It's there, but you don't have to use it. And if no one uses it, at the end of the day, they can't sell a product. If it doesn't provide the utility that it says it provides, then you can't, they're not, at the end of the day, if it's about making money, if there's a product they put out that no one uses, then then they can't sell that product. And I think that kind of narrative of inevitability, that it's happening anyway, you might as well get with the program. Like you said, it's shifted that conversation from, do we need this? Why do we need this? To, that's done. Those questions are answered, So let's just talk about how we do it properly. And that's sometimes the challenge in the field of responsible AI as well, because it comes from that baseline of it's happening. So let's do it right. Whereas if you want to take a step back and actually start from a more ethical kind of, question of, should we be doing this at all? Do we need this? Why do we need this? It's asking that why, instead of the how. We've just shifted on to the how. And so if it's already accepted that, AI is going to be part of our lives, then it kind of, I don't know, I think it encourages obedience and acceptance, and that serves whoever is already in power, and it makes you think like, oh well, you're powerless, so you might as well get with the program to make your life easier. And I don't believe in that. I think a different way is possible. Like different voices can be heard, different things can be said, and it feeds into the narrative as well. The other narrative, I guess, is the AI is too complicated for you to understand. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. We know all about it. It's too hard for you to understand. But you don't have to be an expert machine learning engineer or anything, because you don't have to understand the exact mechanics of it. You just need to understand the principles of it and how it works and the decisions made around it. Not everyone understands how every machine or thing in their lives work, but you understand the basic principle of it, the basic physics, the basic whatever. So it's that, you leave it to us. You don't need to think about this, leave it to us. And once again, I feel that that's a bit of a, obedience thing, I'm not calling for a revolution, but I am sort of, in a way, calling for a revolution at the same time.
Yeah, just to quickly add, it's totally fine and totally legitimate to make existing systems better. The problem is, no AI or no use of AI as an option is gradually being removed. So that's the problem. And also, I would focus on, institutions succumbing to this pressure, like Oxford and Cambridge signing up and getting contracts with OpenAI, and other universities, including my own university in Trinity. You are constantly, there's constant push for you to use these systems in your teaching research pipeline, with very little option or no option to say no, to refuse. So that is the problem.
Can I change the narrative on this as well? Because I think we're talking and critiquing very eloquently the kind of big tech take on AI, which is very much we are the people who know how this technology is developing. We can develop this technology and then we can apply it to all kinds of problems and solve everything. But I think within the tech world, there's also another narrative, which is almost the little tech narrative. And with the kind of sifted hat on, which you were referring to earlier, which is we write about all the startups and what they're doing. And I think that's a completely different story that is going on with AI at the moment. And they are very much focusing on what are the problems that we can help solve and how can we use the technology to solve them. And that, to my mind, is a far more interesting, constructive debate, because if you're running a startup and you're trying to address a real-world problem, you have to start with the problem and then work backwards rather than work with the technology and work forwards. And I think that is where the promise of AI is. And I think in many respects it is an extraordinary technology or subgroup of technologies which can be used for extraordinary good to address a lot of the big problems that we do have in society. And one of them, I think, is the productivity. I absolutely take the point that you're making about the Luddites and the argument about that. And the point about the Luddites is that they were actually rational economic actors, weren't they? They were resisting the mechanization of their work and the destruction of their livelihoods. Most rational economic people would do exactly what they did. But in the bigger context of the productivity explosion that happened at the time of the Industrial Revolution, there clearly was a kind of bigger benefit to be had from the automation of so many kind of functions as well. And I think we're in a similar position today. There are enormous benefits that can be had from using and deploying this technology, but on a human level, we have to be absolutely conscious it's going to mess up people's lives, it's going to displace jobs, it's going to disrupt all kinds of functions as well. So I think the story which we're all trying to grapple with is how can we extract the benefits of this technology with minimizing the downsides, which there undoubtedly are.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think it's that sense that there are a set of economic and possibly political conditions that we're not exposed to in these discourses. And I think this idea that productivity might be one factor that dominates as opposed to part of a much richer landscape of tensions around economics and politics. Certainly if I look at my email inbox, I don't feel more productive than I did before email. I think the same could be said about AI. So, what kinds of productivity are being enabled? What economic conditions are being set for us around productivity or growth or whatever it might be? And how is AI sort of part of those discourses or narratives, I think is super interesting. And I think
and for whose benefit?
Who's benefiting?
Yeah,
from
like,
those,
these increases of productivity, and growth, it's for whose benefit?
For who? Yeah.
Yes. And I feel we would be remiss to not mention that the environmental impact narrative gets wholly ignored. It's increasingly higher profile now, but then that also ties right back to the question of when John was saying that AI, the term AI is so poorly defined and it encompasses so many different technologies in so many different use cases with so many different histories and track records of evidence of benefits. But right now, the discourse is focused on generative AI. And generative AI, there is more evidence for its negative impacts than there is for its positive impacts. And one of which is the environmental impact. And not many people really know hugely about it. I think that's what we've encountered in our discussions. I was at a workshop, just before Christmas, and I was talking about the environmental impact, and someone said, "Oh my God, I've been using ChatGPT, paying my £20 a month for years, and I use it for everything." It never occurred to me it had an environmental impact. And so once again, that's about the control of narrative, and that's interesting.
If I could quickly respond to your point about how AI can be used to tackle, big questions, and yes, there might be some merit for using AI for tackling some kind of social challenges. And in order not to talk in abstract, maybe we can say, let's say, UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So those are big challenges like no hunger, no gender discrimination, peace, no war, environmental welfare, and so on. And that's actually where lots of big corporations, including Microsoft and Google, are pushing for the use of AI. And with the caveat that there might be some space for AI to tackle maybe a tiny sliver, a tiny bit of those problems. But when you look at these problems holistically, the root cause of these problems is actually, capitalism, power asymmetries, and massive inequalities. And as a whole, AI is actually contributing, making this gap even wider. And things like, gender equality, no hunger are not something you can really tackle with technology. They are something that require political will. They are something that require, structural change. And if you actually look at issues such as peace and war, you find that big companies, tech companies like Microsoft and Google are directly powering the current genocide that we are living through, that's happening in Gaza. So for me, yes, there might be some merit, but the bigger picture is that big tech and the tech industry is part of the problem, if not the core problem of why we have these massive gaps and discrepancies.
You're saying there that you think AI is what is driving that, but isn't it the way that AI is being used that is driving it? So it's the framework in which this technology is being adopted rather than something inherent in the technology itself.
I don't want to take up all the time, but I don't think this distinction between AI and the people that are using AI is as simple as that. It's the same as like guns don't kill people, people kill people. I think if you actually remove guns, you would have a much better, environment. The same goes for AI.
I mean, I think in my own thinking about this and through my own research, that division between what AI is and what the political or economic conditions are not separate. They're
all intertwined.
AI is because of the political conditions in which we inhabit and vice versa. But I think what John has done is sort of taken a gamble and pitched a sort of more positive version of AI. And I think we all sort of hope for that possibility. So we've only got 10 minutes left. So in a couple of minutes each, I don't know if you all had a more positive counter narrative that you could speak to.
I contributed to a paper last year around a framework for countering these narratives of inevitability, and we're trying to pull together a database of examples of this, but we kind of split them into refusal, resistance, reclaiming, and reimagine AI. And an example of reclaiming that I wrote in the thing was, I think it's a quite well documented case study, is Tehiku Media in New Zealand, who built their own Maori language models without the assistance of big tech, using data from the Maori people for the purpose to serve the Maori people. And their licensing agreements, everything was done for the community for which they were serving. And I think this is a wonderful way of reclaiming tech for community purposes and aims, and it's an example of where it could make a difference. And I love technology, kind of thing, and that's the thing. And I can see it could have potential. It's just right now a lot of the narratives are a bit skewed, in the wrong direction, I think. And it's time to push back a bit on it and offer different visions of an AI world, because I think there are different visions that could happen, and it's not all like WALL-E where we're all like, amorphous blobs because we don't have to work anymore, because that's the vision that's being sold, right? Like, oh, mundane work, you don't need to do all this anymore, it will do everything for you. And you're like, well, yeah, but I think WALL-E was a cautionary tale, it wasn't like an instruction manual, like, for the future we want for humanity, like, because the planet was destroyed, right? Kind of thing. And people couldn't do things anymore. They just floated around and ate and drank. And I was like, is this the future we want? Because I think part of it is about what is the future that we want for humanity, and how can technology help us get there?
Yes.
Not this is the future for technology and how can humanity help it get there?
Yeah.
And I think I know it sounds like a bit nuanced, but it's like, but that's the shift, right? Like, I always like to quote Ruha Benjamin, and I'm going to paraphrase this, I'm going to mess it up, but it's something about, remember the craft and build the worlds you cannot live without, while you dismantle the worlds you cannot live within. And I think that's such a wonderful, hopeful kind of vision for, and that applies not just to AI, it applies to everything, right? Like, what kind of a future do we want, and how can AI help us get there, instead of currently right now where the narratives are driven by AI when it should be driven by us. But
Thank you, Steph. John, how about you?
Well, I think if we change the narrative to a more positive thing, it would be kind of picking up on what I was saying earlier about trying to find specific real-world cases where technology can be applied for good. And as I say, a lot of startups who are using it, I think, in incredibly imaginative ways. I do believe it can be a tool to increase productivity in a good sense and help grow the economies, which would benefit us all. to take some examples, I mean, there's one AI startup, Physics X, who are using AI, which is not, as Steph is saying, everyone confuses it and says it's generative AI and just imagines that's the only version of it. But they are using AI to help design more efficient wind turbines. They are using it to help design more effective heart valves. There are other companies who are using it to expand scientific research. The AlphaFold that was developed by Google DeepMind is used by 200 million has been used by 2 million biologists around the world for their research projects. It has been really a fantastically beneficial thing that they have developed. And similarly, in material science as well, inventing new materials. I think there are real possibilities of using AI for that as well. So I think there are real positive use cases, but as I say, I think it stems from trying to use the technology to address a real world problem rather than imagining it's going to solve everything.
Thank you, John. Abeba?
Ooh. Well, I think maybe I want to make 2 points really briefly. The first one is that refusal and resistance have to be on the table as option. And second of all, maybe I agree with both of you here. Maybe the future of AI is small, intentionally built systems. And I love the Maori community because they are a really good example of how you can build technology based on, nothing about us without us principle. They have, it was their own data. I think they had hundreds of hours of audio data. They cleaned their own data. They annotated. They built their own models. They have full control of their data. They kept it in their own servers and so on. And they built it for a specific purpose, which was to resuscitate their dying language. Because of British colonialism, their forefathers were forced to speak English, and they built it intentionally and specifically for that purpose. So I think this is a really good example. If we want to first of all, we should remove the idea that everything has to be AI or the future has to be AI. We have to imagine a future without AI. But if there has to be a future with AI, it has to be. We have to strip, the current idea of AI completely from capitalist motives, from, these large purposeless general models, basically just floating around looking for purpose. And they have to be small and purpose built. And they also have to, acknowledge also existing, power asymmetries. Currently, we have the world that is, dividing and kind of, going more and more apart, where the rich are getting richer and the poor are disfranchised further. And if we want, to build a future with technology, we have to be in a mindset where we want to tackle, how do we, for example, how do we think about, AI systems that are used in, for example, to detect criminal activities or in recidivism. So we have to kind of get rid of this idea of building technology as a gotcha or to punish people, but rather, how do we build it to, for example, rehabilitate people when they are out of prison? Or how do we actually build systems to catch crime, but completely flip the definition of crime upside down? Focus on white collar crime. Focus on the tech CEOs that are doing massive theft on regular people. I think with those kind of objectives, I can see a future where technology can be used as a tool that narrows, this inequality gap.
Thank you, Abeba. I think we've done this really nice arc where we've kind of begun at AGI, the sort of to use Donna Haraway's term, the God trick, where a technology might see everything from nowhere, to sort of much more grounded examples of how we might mobilize a technology to have some value in the world, and not be everything everywhere. So we've got, I think, about half an hour for questions. We've both got, obviously, the audience here, and we have an online stream of questions via Slido. I think what we'll do maybe is start with a question in the room, just so we can look through the Slido questions as well, and then we'll turn to Slido. So can we see any hands for questions? We've got a question right here. Sorry, there's a mic that should come your way. Sorry, question right here at the front.
Hello. I run a financial advice firm, and we use AI a lot, so I'm really interested in what you're saying. And I think one thing for me, and this is a positive, because I find this quite negative towards it, so I thought I'd start with a positive. We've got a real bad sort of advice gap, and so people aren't able to afford to pay for financial advisors. We've got young people that aren't coming into the industry, and what AI is actually doing is helping that. So as a business owner, we're able to offer our services at a lower cost. I think AI is helping that, and also be able to train. So we have a program where we train really young people. We'd only be able to do that with this technology. It's allowing me as a business owner to kind of do less of the admin, do less of that, and it takes over these mundane tasks. Also, it's a regulated business, it's very repetitive, and it just fits in. We cannot get young people to want to be financial advisors. It's getting worse and worse. Gen Z want the lifestyle, don't they? They don't want these kind of professional, kind of old school jobs. So, I find it really positive in our industry because it, can cope with it. And I think talking about it so generally was kind of hard to understand, because it's kind of generalising it as just AI. But for someone like me, it's going, well, different industries have got different needs. So for financial services, which is regulated, I find it a very positive thing because it actually keeps us within regulation.
John, did you want to respond?
I think that was a very elegant statement.
Okay, I think, what we see there is this nice example of where we can actually start to think about very concrete examples that isn't this AGI, but may have some value for small companies like yourselves.
Could I ask a wee question, though? You just said that young people don't want to be financial advisors. And I like the idea you're democratizing the access to financial advice. But is there not a potential risk that in the future you are talking yourself out of your job, that there will be no financial advisors in the future because AI can just do it? I mean, I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just.
Yeah, so basically this is what the whole our industry is sort of looking at. And I went to a seminar last week. And I think what's interesting is, you can use AI now and you can say, I've built a 270 worksheet Excel spreadsheet that can basically give financial advice. I've done that over the past 11 years and I was like, oh my God. After all that work, talking to sort of AI, I absolutely can. You can say, I am X amount, I'm 26 years old, I want to retire on £1 million, what do I need to do? Absolutely, but it's the resistance, like you talk about, is the clients. They're not going to want advice from AI. They want a human there. But I think what it's going to do is give us kind of superpowers in the sense of going, well, we can give advice quicker. I go into a meeting, Saturn AI takes my notes, that comes out and it's been specifically designed to be financial services led, and it can spot vulnerability. Vulnerability is a big thing in financial services where, you've got people that are domestic abuse, can be, go and withdraw money. And so looking at that from a social kind of situation as well, a lot of financial advisors are salespeople. They've not necessarily been highly educated. They don't care. They work on commissions. So actually, I'm finding it quite positive that these systems are helping you become more ethical as a financial advisor. So I do think that it's working with it. I definitely don't think it'll take over financial advisors, but I just said we've replaced 2 people in the past 18 months. They were leaving, we didn't sack them or anything. anything. But they left, but we didn't have to replace them. So it is real. You know, it's making us a much more, I would say productivity's gone up, honestly, 60% in the past 18 months. And for a small business, what we're trying to do is give back, is train young people to go, look, it's not as boring as you think. You know, you've got technology, because all of us here need a pension. You know, the government's just put inheritance tax up for them who know, for pensions. More and more people are being pushed to advice, but there's nobody coming up. So it is going to help us, I think, in that regard.
Thank you. I think we've got a question that sort of dovetails with this, because of course we are, and I think Steph's been making this point too, we are the recipients of these improvements in productivity with AI tools, etc. But we have to ask ourselves, well, who are the people who are maybe potentially paying the price for this? So there's a question here on Slido. Why do we debate AI without questioning where its data centers are, their ecological crisis, and the labor conditions of data workers in lower income countries? So I think if we start to think of AI as a supply chain problem, what it is we're outsourcing various forms of labor and material use, etc., to somewhere else, and we are the recipients or the beneficiaries of AI in examples like this, which are, of course, empowering, but who's doing the work for us to enable those kinds of tools? Abeba, did you want to have a quick?
I think you have eloquently addressed it. Yeah, that should be like.
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, we should be debating that. We should be deliberating that. But currently, because we are so kind of taken by the AI, hype wave, those questions no longer take a front seat. So yes, we should be debating that, and those are extremely important questions that should be at the center of the AI debate.
Steph, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's that whole, we have divorced AI from the entire system that enables it. And the labor exploitation, the environmental impact, all that is all part of what creates AI. Like Kate Crawford's Atlas of AI, gives you this amazing, it makes you understand what the entire supply chain that leads to this technology that you use in your particular context. And it's about understanding that technology, people always say technology is not neutral. It sits within a wider socio-economic, political ecosystem that enables it. And I guess, and part of that is that narrative. Once again, it's getting you, don't think about that. Think about how it makes this easier for you. And I think that's a challenge, it's a challenge to that negative, because if you do think about it, you might not use it, but you realize that it helps you with your productivity, helps you well. But if you think about it too hard, then you might not want to use it. Yeah. And I think that's a moral and ethical dilemma that we as society, we have the privilege. We are in the privileged society that can have that dilemma and choose to go, okay, that's fine. But then there are people that are being exploited, et cetera, that don't have that privilege to make that choice. And a really great kind of metaphor, I guess, for ChatGPT in light of its association with helping teenagers commit suicide is because someone is saying, can this be ethical? Can you use it ethically when it is inherently associated with unethical situations? And someone on LinkedIn, I can't remember who it is, said, so imagine you knew this guy, Bob, he drives this massive pickup truck, like gas guzzling pickup truck, but he comes around to your house and he helps you do all your things. He's really great handyman, fixes all your things, really helpful, helps you pick up the shopping, all that kind of stuff. Love Bob. And then one day you discover that actually after he comes and helps you, Bob goes down the road, goes to talk to a teenager down there and helps him commit suicide. So what do you think of Bob now? And I was like, oh my God, that's such a great illustration for people, And they said, the truth is most people were like, oh, Bob's coming nowhere near my house again. And so, but we're divorcing ourselves from that kind of context when we talk about, well, it helps my day, it helps me write things quicker, it helps me deal things quicker, et cetera. So it is this kind of trade-offs that we have the privilege to decide on.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting moral dilemma.
Yeah. John, did you have a response?
No, I mean, nothing to add to all.
Yeah.
And I see several hands.
I wanted to take Liz, and then let's go to the back, because I know that people in the back often
that
get...
person has been raising their hands non-stop.
Okay, there's one back. So Liz, and then the gentleman here who's been very keen.
Okay, thank you so much. That's really fascinating. So narratives and questions of resistance and refusal run through what a couple of you said. But there's a narrative that I think John said at the start that I'm hearing much less about. It relates to a question that we ask amongst people I collaborate with. What is not a financial technology? And so what I'm kind of trying to root around for is narratives about the finance that's involved here, because if we only talk about technology and if we only talk about power relations, and you're not looking at that very, very complicated set of arrangements that's funding the new data centres, that's, I mean, the Financial Times coverage about this is excellent, but it is still extraordinarily complicated for people like me to try, or people, any kind of people who are not specialists, to try and understand where the risk is. And this is worrying, especially given the changing nature of who's paying for this development. And some of who's paying for this development, quite a lot of who's paying for this development is, well, us, pensions, insurance funds, investing through private credit in this hyperscale build-out. And well, if you dig around, you will find stuff on that. When I hear big public conversations about AI, it's taken technomoral ethical questions in a way that seems strong critique, but not so materially focused on, well, what can we do about that? Because if it's difficult for someone like me to understand a large language model, look at the relationships to where the money's going, and that'll really, that really hurts. So I just wondered if, when you're thinking about the critique, are you also thinking about the finance and not just the technology? And if you're thinking about the power, if you're not thinking about the finance, thinking about power and who's suffering as a result of this, just, it feels like it's not going to take us anywhere.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think you make a very good point that it is where finance is deciding to invest to exploit this technology. And at the moment, I think we have an extraordinary kind of monoculture that is driven by that kind of Silicon Valley view of how this technology ought to be developed. It's very much the kind of people on Sand Hill Road where all the VCs are based, and in Wall Street who are financing this. And so, yes, I mean, it is kind of doubling down on a particular vision of AI and ignoring the many other possibilities of how this technology can be used. But, you know, as the panelists have been talking about, Abeba and Steph, technology gets developed within a kind of broader context, in a kind of capitalistic framework. And so without changing that framework of how people deploy money, it's hard to see how this is going to develop. But you know, I think all of us have a right to think about how our money is deployed. We all have pensions, we hope, and you know, we should be asking our pension advisors about where they're putting their money. And I think there are kind of examples of people who are trying to use financing to encourage technology for good, and I think we should try to encourage them.
Yeah, I'll quickly say, from a researcher point of view, because research necessarily feeds product development. Yes, we should talk about, you know, who is funding research, and oftentimes you find it's governments, it's the military complex that are the core, you know, bodies that are fueling and empowering research. With a bunch of collaborators, we've, for example, looked at how computer vision research in one of the top computer vision publications, CVPR, has really contributed to surveillance. We looked at where computer vision research ends up being used in the real world, and unsurprisingly, most of it is surveillance. So yes, that is a really important route, but also we should remember for big companies like Meta and Google and TikTok and so on, a lot of their massive wealth is accumulated from our own attention, from the ad revenue that they generate. So this is also another important consideration. That's my take.
Thank you. Let's take the question. There was a questioner here. You had your hand up for a while. Yeah, if you want to.
Hey, thanks very much. My name's Anthony. I should introduce myself as a AI research and developer who quit his job to argue for a pause against this technology. The panel did a wonderful job of identifying a narrative of inevitability that is widely promoted in the industry and pointed out that actually people decide what gets built, and collectively, all of us, the public, should have a say in what we build and how we use it. It is the case that anyone predicting with confidence how these things will go is very over certain. Like, this is a very complicated technology that we can't be sure of the outcomes from. However, it is the case that people outside industry, academics, scientists, and researchers, and thinkers, many are reasonably concerned that the technology is powerful enough that when it becomes more intelligent, it will be able to escape human control, it will be able to take over, it will be able to end our time on this planet, kill everybody you know and love. This is not sci-fi. This is smart people making predictions. I am confused that the scary narrative has not even been mentioned during a panel on the future of the technology. Does anybody have a comment?
Yes. I think that is one of the narratives that has really seeped into public consciousness that many have come to believe it. I think as an AI researcher myself that spends a considerable amount of time really digging into sifting their training data and assessing and evaluating their performance on various scales, for me, it is extremely clear that AI is people through and through. From the training data that's fed into these systems, from the labeling, from the various assessment and evaluations that goes into preparing the data, into model training, fine-tuning, reinforcement learning via human feedback, even the likes of state-of-the-art generative models are constantly, adjusted or constantly calibrated with human feedback. So for me, from the technology itself to the people that decide to build it, to the companies that decide to profit, there can't be AI without human involvement. For me, I can't see any logic in thinking about AI that can exist independent of constant human attention and human decision. That's why this kind of argument about loss of control from AI systems squarely fits in the sci-fi realm that, as you might say, some relatively smart people, I don't want to name names, maybe I should, I don't know, people like, people like, Yoshua Bengio and Jeffrey Hinton, I studied their text during my early PhDs, my master's. they are still legitimate people I would go to understand, recursive neural networks or, something that they are expert on. But when it comes to the risks of AI, they are not the people I would go to. I would go to the people that have been meticulously documenting, how these systems work and the risks associated with them. So they might be smart people, but their view on the risks of AI is completely off.
Can I come in? So I did a podcast series on artificial intelligence, and we interviewed an incredibly wide spectrum of views, from people who argued to the point that you're making, that this was an existential risk to humanity, to people who just rubbished the whole idea of that as a pernicious fantasy. And I think the honest answer is that nobody really knows. There is that debate that is out there, and I think it's actually a very good debate to have, and we should listen to all of the people who are involved in that. The person I would listen to, and I think is worth paying attention to, is Professor Stuart Russell, who gave the Reith lectures a few years ago. And his argument is that we are developing incredibly powerful AI systems, and we will not know how to control them, and in the sense we will give them bad sub-goals that will then take them off into a very bad direction. And so he envisages the possibility of having almost a Chernobyl moment, as he calls it, with AI, where something goes really very badly wrong, whether that's a big cyber attack or a bioweapons attack or whatever that is enabled by AI. And I think that is possible, that would then reset the whole debate on AI. And so, yes, I have obviously a bit more time listening to these people than Abeba does.
I think, just to quickly, I think, again, this is very, hypothetical and based on kind of intellectual fantasies. But again, because this narrative has become so normalized, you see it has distracted from actual real concerns that we should be focusing on. How these systems, encode and exacerbate societal norms, sexism, racism, and so on. How these systems are becoming a tool that are evading our fundamental rights, how we are increasingly living in a surveillance state. And it's not just normalization within public consciousness. You see the impact of the normalization of this narrative in actual impactful ways. For example, the EU AI Act it's now going through revision. I don't know if you are following the omnibus. Now the proposal is to put risks such as existential risk or loss of control from machines as priority, where risks of discrimination and so on are becoming optional. So these are not only a distraction, but they have also dire impact in how we think about AI and how we regulate AI. And for me, this is dangerous.
But I do think this often ends up as a kind of binary debate. You're either in the safety crowd or the ethics crowd. You're either worried about the here and now issues of AI or the longer term misalignment issues. I think we could worry about both. I don't think it has to be one or the other. And you're right that to some extent the big tech industry is crowding out some of the concerns that you legitimately are raising. But I think we can have an informed debate about all of these issues rather than just saying that my issue is more important than someone else's.
I think the issue of actual real harm to concrete people is more important than hypothetical questions.
I'd like to debate both.
I think what you're proposing, John, is that how do we create the conditions for an open discussion about risk? And I think that's what's not being permitted by some of these prevailing narratives, that they shut down other kinds of conversations.
There's definitely a crowding out issue.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's an intentional act, because the solutions being posed for the existential risk is more computation. Well, who benefits from that? Steph, did you want to quickly follow up there? Or?
No notes on.
Yeah, it's all been said. I wanted to close. We've got less than 10 minutes left. Wanted to just come back to Slido. There's a lot of conversation on Slido about hopeful narratives and asking for more positive versions. And I think we struggled as a panel prior to today to think, are we going to sort of weigh towards the negative or the positive? I think we've probably gone to the negative. So I think it is important to recognize that there are people, and I think it was good to hear your version of how you've been using AI, that do want these positive narratives, that do find the positive, and I think we have to hear those as well. I guess in closing, I wanted to pick a question that speaks to a very contemporary moment about many things all at once, perhaps. And so the question is, what is your take on Anthropic's recent ads that push back against advertising using large language model platforms? And for those who don't know, this was an ad that was during the Super Bowl, so clearly a huge audience, and there were positive ads towards AI within the presentation of the Super Bowl as well. But Anthropic, who is a major funder of large language models, etc., chose to sort of present a slightly more critical version, I think targeting OpenAI, but I might be wrong about that. So I guess maybe sort of just closing the conversation by thinking about a very contemporary issue set within a very contemporary context. Steph, did you want to?
Oh God, I haven't seen them at all. Yeah. I heard, but it just sounds like a little bun fight between the two of them, and playing it out in front of the public because they have the money and means and power to do so. Yeah. And ultimately, it's about that race, right? Like who can win the race to be the biggest AI company, and that's just the latest example of it. Yeah. I mean, it's in response to obviously that ChatGPT is moving to selling you ads, pushing ads when you use ChatGPT, and it's, I don't know, it's all just part of this, this narrative around AI that I think is just ultimately really problematic, and like, I don't know, I haven't seen the ad, so I can't comment on it. So I feel like I can't say much about it other than what I've read about it, but I haven't seen it. But it just sounds like two big companies taking the piss out of each other on a public stage using, because they can pay for massive ads in the middle of a massive sporting event.
Abeba?
I have nothing to add.
Just think if they spent that money on doing something good.
Yes.
Like, helping some of the victims of ICE and stuff like that in the US, or just think what they could have done with that money instead.
I have seen the ad.
Yes.
I didn't think it was terribly good, but I think it actually raises quite an important point. That back in the day when Google was setting up, Larry Page and Sergey Brin wrote a paper where they argued that Google would never take advertising because that would corrupt architecture of the surfacing of knowledge, and it would create different incentives rather than the kind of pure discovery. And they were right. And I think that is the worry that actually Anthropic were trying to focus on with what OpenAI is doing. I mean, already we worry that generative AI systems and LLMs are hallucinating. How do we trust these systems? Are they presenting false information? You add in advertising as well, and that just compounds the problem. So I think OpenAI in particular has to come up with a business model because they have taken in a colossal amount of money on the promises that they're going to develop this super powerful AI. But once you plug a monetization machine into the back of some of these systems, that can be inherently problematic, as we have seen with the whole way that social media has developed.
Yeah.
Systems that are already very emotionally manipulative. And so you can imagine if ChatGPT served ads, in the case of Adam Rain, it'd probably like give him an ad for where to buy the rope for his noose. I know that sounds horrific and flippant, but it would have been that customization, right? Based on his engagement with it. So.
Yeah. It does seem the inevitable direction of travel for some of these tools, at least. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. I've got a few closing remarks. So first of all, I'd like to thank our speakers, Abeba, John, and Steph. I'd like to thank the audience in the room, thank you, and the audience online. I'd like to thank the organizers of this series, the EFI, BRAID, and the Center for Technomoral Futures, and the team who've helped organize this at the Center for Technomoral Futures and the EFI, Glowcast for their technical support, MyClearText for the live captioning, and again, the speakers. Thank you very much. So if you'd like to stay up to date with future Technomoral